Hello, my friends. I want to apologize for not making any new videos in the past 6 months, as I would have preferred going outside and making videos outside. But unfortunately, I was not able to, and I am still not able to go out of Tehran province because of the restrictions. We are limited to the city, and we have to stay mostly at home. Okay, yeah, so I'm preparing this video for you, and I wish that there was some way that we could communicate with each other. I ask you questions and you ask me questions, and I give you my opinions and you give me your opinions, but it's not possible. Anyway, I want to talk to you about parallel history. You want to know what parallel history is? Parallel history is when you are told about an era of the history in a country, such as, for example, United States, and that you know what is happening also in Europe and Far East and other countries in the world at the same time. So I don't know what your opinion is. I think it would have been more interesting when you read about, let's say, the American Civil War. You want to know why American Civil War was important and what was happening in Europe at the same time, what was happening in the Middle East, what was happening in the Far East, and it would have been more interesting. As a student, when I was going to school and listening to my history teacher, I was very bored because he was just telling us about who ruled, which dynasty ruled, and it was not very interesting. Okay, somebody is fighting somebody else, but it would have been more interesting that he would have told us that while this was happening here in Persia, this was also happening in Europe, and it was the same thing was happening. Some other events was happening in America, and yes, but if you are told that in this period this happened in Iran, and you don't know what is happening in other countries, it's not, again, my opinion, it's not very interesting. What is your opinion? Today we are January 17, 2021, and 2020 has been a rough year for everyone all across the world. I want to ask you what you have been doing with your time in 2020. As for me, I have, and as you may be interested, I am very interested about the history, and history is my favorite subject, and I've been reading many novels, historical novels in 2020 about medieval Persia, and I will tell you later why medieval Persia was very important. And I've also been reading books about, for example, the Dan Brown Da Vinci Code, or another book, Chicago, the history of Chicago, which was also interesting. But for now, let us concentrate on medieval Persia. 2020 has not been a good year for all people around the world. Many jobs have been lost due to the COVID-19, and many industries such as tourism, restaurants, airlines, hotels, shopping malls, oil, retail business have seen bankruptcies. It has been highly recommended to stay at home as much as possible, wear masks, wash our hands regularly, and do social distancing. And as for me, I've had plenty of time to meditate, read books, and research about history, which is my favorite subject. I've heard from many people that our world would be a better place if there were only one country in the world and nations unite under one constitution and law. The ideal situation is if we all set our differences aside. We would then no longer need any armies, but a police force that would reinforce the law. I am living in Iran and have been reading more than 20 historical novels about the medieval Persia in this period. Some were written by Persian writers and others by foreign writers who had done huge research in the Persian history, enabling them to write these books. I'm going to introduce these books to you in chronologically later, so that you can also enjoy them and perhaps become interested in medieval Persia. Why do I find medieval Persia so interesting, and what has been the role of Persia in this crucial period? In my opinion, by examining different eras, the main reason for invading new lands were to collect taxes under the pretext that as your new rulers, we should bring security to the land. Taxes were sometimes collected fairly and other times excessively. The use of force was very essential for this purpose. I fully understand the idea of using force and power in those periods. The rulers had to be very cruel, hard, and aggressive to frighten their subjects that they either have to obey or become faced with harsh punishments. What is your opinion? This is very hard for us to understand in the 20th and 21st century, as news travel very fast by internet, satellite, radio, TV, and other means of rapid communication. Persia has been on the Silk Road for centuries, which meant that trade between East and West had to be done through this vast area. Persia was a buffer area for many centuries, which would either influence or dampen the invaders. Now, let me show you a map of the world, not the world, the Far East, Europe, and Middle East. This is it. Okay. For many centuries in the ancient world, Persia was at war with the Roman and Greek empires. These empires prevented one another to invade the other countries situated further east, such as India or China, or further to the west, such as Britain and Scandinavia. Okay, Alexander the Great invaded Persia around 302 BC, but they became so much absorbed. Alexander the Great army became so much absorbed and were weakened by the Persian influence that stopped them going further to the east. We can assume that people in the Far East would have been speaking Greek today had the Persian not resisted as they had. Wars are not always of too much benefit to those engaged, since it does tend to diminish the resources of those countries involved. One of the main reasons both the Persian and Roman empires vanished were that they had become weak after fighting each other for so many years. Several events from the 4th to 6th centuries marked the transitional period during which the Roman empires east and west were divided and the Persians were defeated by the Arabs. 2 decades long between Sasanian dynasty and the Romans had exhausted the two empires' resources and contributed to major territorial losses during Arab conquest of Persia, Egypt, and Syria to the Arabs. Before the Arab conquest, many countries to the west of Persia and Persia had their own languages, cultures, and identities. The Arabs managed to impose their own language, religion, and culture in every country that they had invaded. Before the Arab invasion, the languages, religions, and cultures in Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Iraq, and Jordan were not the same as they are today. Each of these countries had their own languages, cultures, and religion. As for Persia and the countries to the east of Persia, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, China, and to the north of Persia, such as Russia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and other countries further to the north or east, things are a lot different. today we see that each and every country to the north and east of Persia speak their own languages and practice their own culture. For 2 centuries after the Arab invasion of Persia, they were trying to impose their own language, but fortunately the Persian resistance enabled them to practice the Persian language and culture. We also had some influence on the Arab invaders in such a way that many Arabic words today have been derived from the Persian language. The role of Persian buffering can also be seen in the 11th century when the Mongols had invaded Persia and were trying to invade Europe. Had it not been for the Persian resistance and influence, the map and languages of Europeans would have been a lot different today. The French, German, English, and other Western languages would have been inexistent, and people in Europe would be speaking the Mongolian language. Now you may laugh at me, but if you again look at this map, you will see that here is Persia, and here is the Mongolia, and here is Europe. So as they came towards Persia, they had to fight and their forces were weakened. So by the time reaching Turkey and closer to Austria, they were very weak, So Persia was actually a buffering area. And also when the Arabs, again as I explained before, they changed the languages to the north of Saudi Arabia, in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, Libya, Algeria, and so on to the west, and also impose their religion somewhat over this region. Now that the role of Persia is clear for us, I would like to tell you more about the medieval Persia, also known as Middle or Dark Ages in Europe. So medieval Persia in Persia and Dark Ages or Middle Ages in Europe. The reason this period was known as Dark Ages in Europe was due to the demographical, cultural, and economic deterioration in Western Europe following the decline of the Roman Empire, which in my opinion was due to the expansion of the Arab territory. What is your opinion? As I explained before, the Roman Emperor Constantine decided to call the eastern region of his empire as Byzantine and chose the city of Constantinople as its capital. In 1717, the city of Constantinople was besieged by the Umayyad Caliphates, the Arabs. The Christian invaders and Arabs were at war with each other for many years. In that time, the people living in that area, Turkish people were converted to Islam, and the Ottoman forces gradually emerged as a dominant force in the area. In 1453, the Ottoman forces entered the Constantinople and ended the Byzantine rule forever. The Ottoman Empire began to expand to the west as far as Austria to the west, and Saudi Arabia and Egypt to the south. There were no major events in the Middle or Dark Ages in Europe except the Black Death in 1347 that wiped out as many as 50% of the European population. Also in 1492, Christopher Columbus had accidentally reached America, or the New World. Our historical novels, the ones I have been reading, is taking place in medieval Persia from 819 at the start of Safavid Empire. Let me show you the Safavid Empire. In 819, or 2 centuries after the Arab invasion of Persia. As I explained before, I'm going to give you a brief summary of the books in the chronological order, with some important events, as you will see. The first book I'm going to introduce to you was written by Hamze Sardadvar. The name is From Fishing to Becoming a King and Forming a Kingdom. This is the book. It is written in Persian, and I don't know if it has been translated into English. The novel is the true story of 3 brothers who were simple fishermen in the northern area of Persia. These brothers were true patriots and nationalists who believed that they were the descendants of the Sasanian dynasty. They were living during the Safavid Empire. I showed you the map. Between 819 and 999 AD. This was the era of the Holy Roman Empire in Europe at around 843 AD, and the Vikings at 871 AD. Khwarazmi, a Persian, was the famous mathematician born in 820 AD, who introduced algorithm and algebra. These 3 brothers worked their way up in the army and helped each other to establish a new powerful kingdom in Persia, and were struggling to lessen the Arab influence in Persia. The founder of this dynasty, the Buyid dynasty, Ali ibn Buya, was originally a soldier in the service of the Daylamite warlord Meikan ibn Kaki, but later changed his adherence to the Iranian ruler Mardavich, who had established the Ziyarid dynasty and was himself related to the ruling dynasty of Gilan, a region bordering Daylam. Ali was later joined by his two younger brothers, Hassan ibn Buya and Ahmad ibn Buya. In 932, Ali was given Karaj as his fief and thus was able to enlist other Daylamites into his army. However, Ali's initiative proved too much for Mardavich, who planned to have him killed, but Ali was informed of Mardavich's plan by the latter's own vizier. Vizier is minister or prime minister. The brothers, with 400 of their Daylamite supporters, then fled to Fars, where they managed to take control of Arajan. However, the Buyids and the Abbasid general Yaqut shortly fought for control of Fars, with the Buyids eventually emerging victorious. This victory opened the way for the conquest of the capitals of Fars, Shiraz. After this dynasty came the Ghazni dynasty. Ghazni dynasty was the next dynasty ruling Persia from 977 to 1183 AD. Two of the most famous Persian characters in this period were Avencia and Ferdowsi. This is the map of the Ghazni dynasty region, as you can see. Avencia is the founder of the modern medicine, and Ferdowsi, the greatest poet who spent his entire life writing Persian poems from the creation of society in ancient Persia until the Arab invasion. Most of the poems are facts and parts of the Persian history, and the other parts are either mythical poems or are believed to be legends about the Persian heroes and enemies. It is somewhat similar to the legends of Hercules, Achilles, Roman and Greek gods. He is and was admired by all true Persians, since he had dedicated his whole life reviving the Persian language, history and culture with his poems. I also read the novel The Way to Isfahan, or La Route d'Isfahan, written by Gilbert Sinué, a French writer. This is the book. As you can see, Gilbert Sinué was a French writer who knew about the life of Avicenna. Gilbert Sinué has obtained all his information from the memoir of Joseph, who was Avicenna's companion and friend for more than 2 decades. Ibn Sina, also known as Abu Ali Sina or Poor Sina, and often known in the West as Avicenna, was a Persian polymath who is regarded as one of the most significant physicians, astronomer, thinker, and writer of the Arabic Golden Age, and the father of early modern medicine. The next three books that I studied were Samarkand, written by Amin Malouf, here. This is in English. Omar Khayyam, Omar Khayyam. This book was written by Harold Lamb. And The God of Alamut, written by Paul Amir. And okay, it seems to me that these three writers, Amin Malouf from Lebanon, and Harold Lamb from England, and the other one by a French writer, Paul Amir. We are very interested about the events which took place during the Seljuk Empire between 1037 and 1043. This is the map of Seljuk Empire at that time. The characters in their books were Hassan Sabbah, Omar Khayyam, and Nizamul Mulk, who happened to be very close friends at one point in time, but each chose to follow a different path in life. Nizamul Mulk was the minister and advisor of the Seljuk Empire, a pro-Arab dynasty. Ironically enough, they had chosen a capable Persian responsible for the administration of the Persian territory. Omar Khayyam was a renowned poet, philosopher, mathematician, and astronomer. Hassan Sabbah was a nationalist who was trying to lessen the domination of Arabs in Persia. Paul Amir's story about Hassan Sabbah is very fascinating. Hassan Sabbah had come up with a new version of Islam that would lessen the Arabs' influence in Persia. It is said that he would give a cannabis plant called hashish to his followers and created a heavenly type of environment for them. He used his method to make his followers believe that they would go straight to heaven if they listened to his commands. The word assassin is derived from hashashun or hashishun, hashish. His followers would do anything that Hassan Sabbah would desire. With one hand gesture, he could make his followers drop themselves off a cliff or send them to assassinate the high officials in the Seljuk Empire. Hassan Sabbah's famous castle is located in Alamut, a small village around 70 miles from Qazvin city in the northern area of current Iran. This castle is at the top of an inaccessible cliff with water irrigation pipes. It was destroyed 2 centuries later by the Mughal invaders. Let me show you the picture of Alamut Castle. This is Alamut Castle. And this is another picture from down the cliff. You see, it's right up here. The story of Omar Khayyam told by Harold Lamb is even more fascinating than his 2 other friends, Hassan Sabbah and Nizam al-Mulk. It has been said that he was fully supported by the Seljuk kings, since they believed that Omar Khayyam is an astronomer who could foresee the future and could advise them about their war strategies. It is believed that he had built a planetarium near Neyshabur and had proved that the earth is rotating around the sun, well before Copernicus in Europe in the 16th century. And Neyshabur is a city to the north, to east of Iran, close to Mashhad. Unfortunately, this thesis was against the Islamic and Christian teaching, who believed that the earth is flat as the center of the universe, and every other planets rotate around the earth. Omar Khayyam's books and planetarium was burned to the ground after the defeat of the Seljuk king by the clergymen. In the book of Samarkand by Amin Malouf, he brings the 3 characters together very nicely, but the story ends with the sinking of Titanic, with its most precious secret book inside a box, and it was about the Seljuk Empire. Next, I'm going to talk about the Khwarezmian Empire. This is their map and the region that they had occupied. The Khwarezmian ruled the Persian territory from 1077 until 1231. 2 major events happened in this period. One of them was the birth of Sa'di, a well-traveled and wise poet whose poems are translated in all major world languages. His poems are about the human nature, which are true as today as they were centuries before. In my opinion, he was the greatest psychologist and sociologist in the history of mankind. It seems that nothing is changing in the human nature. Jealousy, love, anger, greed are still in our blood. What is your opinion? Have we changed? Has our nature changed that much since 2,000, 3,000 years ago, since 100 years ago? What is your opinion? One of Sa'di's poems is still above the United Nations gate, which says that human beings are linked together like parts of our bodies and were created equally. It means that all human beings are just the same. We are all created with two eyes, one nose, two ears, one heart, one liver, two kidneys, one kidney, two kidneys, and two hands, two legs. So we are all created equally. The other major events. The other major event was unfortunately a sad pretext that provoked the Mughals to invade and destroy a huge part of the Persian cities. The trade between the East and West had always been through the Silk Road, which was passing through the Persian territory, and the Persians were, of course, benefiting from this gateway. They were collecting taxes. It has been said that the Mughal business caravan was harassed by the Persian tribes, and when the Mughal ambassador protested against this harassment, he was also killed. The Mughal then attacked the Persians with the utmost brutality, killing all people on their way and burning entire villages and cities on their way. The Mughals' invasion of Persia lasted for almost 2 centuries. Strangely enough, two of the most pacifist poets and philosophers used to live in the same period as Mughals. Maulana, who migrated from Balkh to Konya, Balkh from the east of Persia to Konya in the current Turkey, and Hafiz in Shiraz south of Persia. The story of Hafiz, the adventurous life of Hafiz and Candy Rock, was written by Hamza Sardadgar. Here it is. This book is also very fascinating. Apparently, Hafiz was from a poor family and had to work at a bakery and deliver bread to the neighboring homes. He was a very handsome man, and many women were very eager to meet him. One day, a young, beautiful girl from a very rich family became very curious and was watching Hafiz from far apart, from far away, and Hafiz was making door-to-door bread delivery. She asked her close friend to set up a meeting, a date, so that he could get a closer look at Hafiz. It was in this encounter that Hafiz and this beautiful girl fell in love. Close to this bakery used to be a place where local poets were reading about their poems for the crowd, and Hafiz's interest in poetry grew little by little, and he also wished to make poems and read it for the crowd. There were, however, a few obstacles. He was not very literate and also stuttered when speaking. It is said that a miracle happened one day, and he suddenly started making the best poems and reading it for the people without stuttering. Some people say that he was inspired by the girl he had fallen in love with. He was employed by the Mughal ruler of Shiraz. Okay, as you can see here in this map, the Mughal Empire had shrunk from after 100 years only to these three regions here. Okay. Hafiz was then employed by the Mughal ruler of Shiraz as the court poet, and his financial situation then allowed him to ask the hand of the girl he loved for marriage. But unfortunately, at the same time, the ruler of Shiraz fell off out of favor by his superiors, and he had to leave Shiraz, and Hafiz agreed to accompany his employer. And it is not clear that he ever married the rich girl, the girl or not. Hamza Sardadvar has also written another book about Sarbedaran lady. Sarbedaran head on gallows were a mixture of religious dervishes and secular rulers that came to rule over part of western Khorasan in the midst of the disintegration of Mughal Ilkhaniyats in the mid-14th century. It was more like this movement, Sarbedaran movement, it was more like a freedom movement. They wanted to free Iran, free Persia from the Mughals. In his novel, the Mughal were constantly brutalizing the Persian people and forcing the Persian women to become their wives. One day, one of the high-ranking Mughal officers wanted to take a brave Persian lady as a wife, but she escaped and hid in the town. When found by the Mughal officer, she led a group of Persian men to revolt against the ruling Mughals. It is claimed that this lady was the founder of the Sarbedaran movement, head of gallows movement, head of gallows. When found by the Mughal officer, so this is the end of the Sarbedaran movement. After the Sarbedaran, it was the Safavid who ruled Persia from 1487 until 1698. The founder of the dynasty was Shah Ismail, and at the height of dynasty, they controlled all of what is now known, what is now Iran, Azerbaijan Republic, Bahrain, Armenia, Eastern Georgia, parts of the North Caucasus, Iraq, Kuwait, and Afghanistan, as well as part of Turkey, Syria, and Pakistan. Now I'm going to talk to you about this fort. Qahqahe Castle or Fort of Laughter is located 85 kilometers away from Meshkin Shah in Ardabil province, Iran. This castle was built in the mountains and was used as a jail for anti-kingdom politicians during the Safavid dynasty. Ismail II, the third king of the Safavid dynasty, was the most famous person who was imprisoned in Qahqahe or Fort of Laughter. Here is the map of the Safavid Empire, and this is the book written by Hamze Sardadvar, Qahqahe Castle or Fort of Laughter. For your information, this fort, this castle this is a photo of the castle at the top of the mountain, and this is another one, as you can see. In the book written by Hamze Sardadvar, it's a beautiful novel about the imprisonment of later to be Shah Ismail II in the Fort of Laughter for almost 20 years. The daughter of the fort keeper and the young Prince Ismail II fell in love with each other. She was hoping to become the Queen of Persia one day, and made many attempts to free the young prince from the Fort of Laughter. Okay, we are going to finish about that dynasty, and we'll go to the next dynasty. The next novel is about the life of Nader Shah, the founder of Afsharian dynasty at around 1698 AD. This is the map of the Afsharian dynasty. And this is another map of the Afsharian dynasty. As you can see, it stretched all the way to India, and it was a very, very huge area stretching to the Ottoman Empire and most of Iraq, Afghanistan, Armenia. And this is the book that I was reading. It is about 1,200 pages or 3 volumes. The writer of this book is Dr. Nasser Enqita, who had gathered painstakingly information from diverse resources about the life of the greatest emperor and conqueror of the medieval Persia. Nader Shah was born from a poor family in a remote village in northern Khorasan. Yes. He belonged to Afsharian tribe, very simple nomadic people. He was employed in Shah Tahmasp's army as a foot soldier at first, but he climbed up the ladder of success very gradually and eventually became the head of the entire Safavid armed forces. He was extremely courageous, brave, wise, disciplined, and a military genius that the world has ever seen. Shah Tahmasp was a very weak king surrounded by sycophantic and corrupt advisors. He engaged in debauchery and spent most of his life making disastrous political decisions. Persia was falling into pieces from internal turmoil and riots. The Ottoman in the west, the Russian Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Turkmenistan in the north, the Afghan and the Baloch in the east were all rising against Shah Tahmasp. Nader was very faithful and loyal to Shah Tahmasp and did not wish to disrespect the previous Safavid kings who had brought so much honor and greatness to Persia. He managed to suppress and squash the internal rebellions around Persia, as well as driving the Ottoman Empire back to their borders, as well as taking full control of Armenia, Caucasus, and Georgia in the north. He also managed to drive the Afghan tribes away from the capital back to their own territory. Nader Shah, he was greater than Alexander the Great in many aspects. Unlike Alexander the Great, who just wanted to conquer and destroy, and that was his interest, Nader Shah's goal, or Nader's goal, was keeping the Persian territory as it used to be at the peak of the Safavid dynasty. He treated his enemies with respect and did not massacre them after they had surrendered. He would free all the enemy soldiers and allow them to return to their country in the most gallant and courteous fashion. He was admired by his enemies for his firmness in the battlefield and gentleness after being victorious. His military approach, such as double envelopment, attack in the oblique order, feigned retreat, deceptive and offensive tactics, were copied in the 19th century by Napoleon and in the American Civil Wars, and later on in the 20th century in World War I and World War II. Nader was a very great leader also in the battlefield, always at the tip of the regiment, always at the front and the first to gallop towards the enemy on the battlefield. His logistic was excellent and would always eat the same food as the other soldiers to boost up their morals. He wouldn't eat separately because I am the higher officer or I am the king. No, he would eat the same food as his soldiers. After beating the Ottoman and driving them out of Persia, he signed a peace treaty with them. He had to write, after signing the peace treaty with the Ottoman, he had to ride all the way to the eastern border to fight the enemies at the eastern front. As explained earlier, the people who were very close to Shah Tahmasp were very sycophantic and corrupt. They advised him that it does not look too good if he does not stand up against Nader and to improve his image. He should also invade the Ottoman Empire. He should take the Ottomans' land. Nader had driven the Ottomans out of Persia, and now Shah Tahmasp was going to invade the Ottoman Empire. Unfortunately, this was a disaster, and the Ottoman crushed the Persian army headed by Tahmasp Shah. Nader, who had spent long hours restoring the borders with the Ottoman and sacrificing so many lives of his soldiers, realized that he should make some steps. He should do something to make Tahmasp Shah understand that listening to his entourage and competing with him, with Nader, is not to the interest of Persia. He invited Shah Tahmasp and his Haram Sara to his camp outside of Isfahan, the capital city of Persia, and set up a special royal tent for them, for Shah Tahmasp and his Haram Sara. He also invited all the all the top government officials to his camp in order to discuss Shah Tahmasp's mistakes. At night, Shah Tahmasp was very drunk, engaging in debauchery. Nader took the government officials to Shah Tahmasp's tent that night and raised the curtain so that the government officials could see Shah Tahmasp in the act of debauchery. The next morning, Nader asked the government officials what should be done with Shah Tahmasp and whether such ruler is worthy of governing Persia. Obviously, they were also disgusted and advised Nader to become the new king. He declined the offer at first by saying that he is very tired of politics and fighting all these wars, but he was persuaded eventually to become the new king of Persia. Shah Tahmasp and his family were sent to exile in Mashhad and were treated with great respect by Nader Shah. After crushing the new uprising in the north, the authorities set up a huge camp for his coronation in Dasht-e-Mohan in Ardabil, where all important government officials and ambassadors were also invited. After the coronation, he gathered all the Sunni, Shiite, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian religious figures in one tent and asked them to discuss their common features and differences once and for all. They all concluded that there is only one God and religion should serve the well-being of people. Nader Shah asked them to put their differences aside so that he could better serve the nation. Few days after his coronation, he raised his army towards the occupied Ottoman territory and managed to eventually drive the Ottomans back to the previous border. After signing a peace treaty with the Ottoman, he was informed that the few countries at the other side of the Persian Gulf are not paying taxes as they had done before, and the pirates were making the Persian Gulf an unsafe place for the commercial ships. He built a small navy and crushed the uprising and revolts in the Persian Gulf and by defeating the pirates. At the same time, he heard that the Afghan rebels are always causing unrest, especially when he is at war or busy at the Western Front. He was informed by the local rulers that Afghan rebels always flee to India after being chased. He sends a messenger to the king of India asking him to close the border, but the Indian king did not even bother to reply. He then sends his top military officer to the Indian king asking for a reply. But the Indian king did not also take him very seriously. The military officer, Nader's military officer, who was strolling in the town, was killed on the street of Delhi by a street mob. And Nader Shah was informed a few weeks later of this violent act. Obviously, he had become very furious, and he was seeking not only revenge, but he was trying to find a solution about the border and about the security of Persia. It was at this moment that Nader Shah decided to teach the Indian king a lesson by invading Persia, by invading India. Invading India from the north was a very risky and dangerous venture. There are simply too many natural obstacles, such as crossing many high mountains which had deep cliffs and many turbulent rivers on his way. The only ruler who had previously made such an attempt had been Alexander the Great, which ended very catastrophically for him. Alexander's army suffered their greatest defeats and had to cross back to Persia very demoralized. As previously mentioned, Nader Shah was very disciplined, and his soldiers respected him for his firm commands. On one of his battles, he had to camp very close to the enemy front line in such a way that the enemy would not notice Nader's presence in the area. He ordered everyone to extinguish any fires, candles, or lamps so that it would be total darkness and the enemy could not locate their position. That night, one of the soldiers was writing a letter to his mother and asking her about his fiancée, using the candlelight to be able to see what he's writing. That moment, Nader Shah was slowly checking his small unit when he noticed and approached a soldier by the candlelight and asked him to write her mother that by writing this letter I am endangering the life of my fellow soldiers, and this would be his last letter since Nader is about to kill him for disobeying his orders. He had the soldier decapitated immediately. By doing so, he made the fellow soldiers understand that discipline is very important for everyone's safety. Nader Shah's army crossed the Indian territory with diligence and great attention. Moving the cannons, artillery, horses safely required great logistic. Nader Shah defeated every resistance in a very gallant fashion. He made the Indian people understand that he was not interested to invade India, but was doing so since the Indian king was giving refuge to the rebels who were causing problems in Persia. Before leaving Persia for India, he summoned his oldest son to rule Persia during his absence with grace and gentleness. Nader's oldest son, Reza Gholi, accepted and to undertake this huge and holy task. But after some time, his corrupt entourage gave him the false news that Nader Shah was defeated and killed in India, and Reza Gholi should be ready to take his father's place as a new king. Reza Gholi prepared an army consisting of few thousand strong men with very fancy uniforms. Also, he was advised to kill Shah Tahmasp and his young sons so that he would not have any other challenges from the Safavid dynasty. A small group of people were sent to the old and almost blind Shah Tahmasp's house. Shah Tahmasp and his young sons were dragged and slaughtered ruthlessly by this small group of soldiers. Back in India, Nader Shah was engaged in a battle with the Indian king just outside the capital of India. The Indians, who outnumbered the Persian army in numbers as well as cannons, artillery, and horses, also had around 1,000 elephants. The Indian chief army officer was very confident that he could defeat Nader Shah with only his elephants that would have attached very sharp blades at the front, and the rest of the Indian soldiers at the rear. To counter the attack and win the battle, Nader Shah devised his own strategy. He knew that elephants are very sensitive to fire and fume and would stampede and become wild. He therefore mounted fuming cloths on his camels and moved them towards the elephants that were also approaching the Persian army. At the sight of the fire and fume, the elephants suddenly turned back. Instead of coming towards the Persian army, they turned back towards the Indian army. The elephants moved towards the Indian army, killing any and every Indian soldier on their way. The Indian army suddenly fell apart, and the Persian moved towards the capital of India without firing a single shot. The Indian king and his entourage, who were so confident a few hours earlier, were amazed of the geniosity of Nader Shah and surrendered the capital. Nader Shah treated the Indian king and his entourage with utter respect and reminded them that this costly war could have been avoided had the Indian king listened to Nader Shah's only fair request as a neighboring country. To leave India, he asked the Indian king that Nader should and his army should be compensated for the war damages, and the borders should be controlled from then on. The Indian king also offered to give a woman slave to Nader Shah, but Nader Shah refused to take any slaves, but instead accepted to have any free and willing women as wives for himself, their soldiers, and officers. Some women slaves were charmed by Nader Shah's firmness in the battlefield and gentleness as a very forgiving person. As he was marching past these women, he noticed a woman who was very different and hiding a dagger behind her. She was hiding a dagger behind her. As he was marching past these women, he noticed a woman very different. She was very different to other women, and was also hiding a dagger behind her. Nader Shah summoned the lady and asked her about the dagger. She told Nader that a Mughal ruler had once asked her to become his wife, but she was not interested. The Mughal ruler takes the woman as a prisoner and tries to make her his wife by force. This woman, her name Setare, was a brave Christian woman who stole the dagger from the Mughal ruler and, after stabbing him to death, fled his castle for the Indian king's court. Nader and Setare fell in love at that moment and were married that evening. Nader Shah was recompensated with as much gold, silver, and jewelry such as Kuh Nur and Daryay Nur. He was given so much gold and jewelry that his camels and horses could carry back to Persia. I mean, the king of India said, you can take as much gold, jewelry, silver as your horses and camel could carry back to Persia. On the way back to Persia, he promised to spend his wealth for the Persian people, and that no taxes would be collected for the next 4 years from anyone. Unfortunately, as Sadi had observed 500 years earlier, human beings' nature is subject to change. Greed, power, money, jealousy, love, hate are all big temptations, and very few people can ever claim that they are different. What is your opinion now? We wish we could speak together and have a dialogue, and I knew your opinion. The news of Nader Shah's conquest soon reaches Persia and to his own crown prince Reza Gholi. Nader Shah, who learns that Shah Tahmasp and his sons had been slaughtered and that Reza Gholi had gathered an army during his absence, became very furious and banishes Reza Gholi from the court, as well as transferring the crown prince title to his younger son Nasrullah Mirza, who had been alongside Nader Shah in all his major battles in India and elsewhere. Upon his return to Persia, he also learns about the revolt in Georgia and northern Azerbaijan and decides to crush the uprising with all his force. As he was passing through the Mazandaran woods in the north of Persia by the Caspian Sea, a bullet was fired at him from a long distance from behind the trees. The bullet barely misses Nader Shah, but destroys the thumb only, his thumb. Nader Shah's thumb, left or right, was destroyed. And Nader sends his soldiers to capture the conspirator who had well planned his escape. Many months later, as Nader was fighting the Georgian rebels in the north, the traitor was captured and brought secretly to face Nader Shah. The traitor claimed that he had been encouraged by Reza Gholi to kill Nader Shah. That Reza Gholi had promised the traitor to Nader promises the traitor to allow him to leave if the claim happened to be true. The claim that his son had ordered his Nader's murder, assassination. Reza Gholi was summoned by his father and questioned about his intent, but he denied it totally. And Reza Gholi was so angry with his father's accusations that he said that he prefers to no longer see him. The next morning, the traitor and Reza Gholi had to face each other to find out the real truth. Reza Gholi admits seeing the traitor and helping his poor family, and that he would help him even more had he been the king of Persia. And here is a very big misunderstanding. It is very ambiguous statement, and one can assume that this is a silent agreement that the traitor would have been rewarded by Reza Gholi if the assassination had taken effect. For the first time in his life, Nader Shah is very indecisive and hesitant of what he should do with his son. Given the fact that the law and discipline was the necessity for governing Persia, he assembled all the high-ranking people to help him decide what should be done with his son. The people around him knew that it is best to remain silent in front of Nader Shah. They knew that discouraging Nader Shah implied that they may be part of the assassination plot, and encouraging him would mean that Reza Gholi may be innocent, and their conscience did not allow them to speak out. Only two people were brave enough to express their opinions: the court physician and his favorite wife Setare, who both discouraged Nader Shah to stop punishing Reza Gholi, his son, his older son. But anger was a force that Nader Shah could not overcome at that moment. The next day, he ordered the executioners to blind Reza Gholi's eyes, his own son's eyes. After the execution, he told Reza Gholi that his wish of not seeing Nader Shah has become now reality. The next day, the traitor was brought in front of Nader Shah, and Reza Gholi to also, the traitor and Reza Gholi were both brought in front of Nader Shah. And Nader Shah said that to the traitor that I'm also going to blind you. The traitor, who had been promised to be freed, objected to Nader Shah, and Nader Shah replied that I had promised to free you, and I will free you, but your eyes have to also be blinded. Reza Gholi, who was standing next to the traitor, was still in great pain from his wounds, and yelled at the traitor that I never asked you to kill my father. Suddenly, Nader realized that blinding his son was the biggest mistake of his life, hasty mistake, and felt very sorry for the rest of his life. But it was too late, and his son could never see the world again. The next day, everyone was trying to stay as far away from Nader as possible, since they all knew that Nader was expecting their right advice instead of keeping silent. As he was walking past his tent, he notices four men giggling and joking around with each other. They were just giggling. He summons them and asks them whether they had been present when he was asking the people's opinion about the fate of his innocent son. They all admitted that they were present when this ordeal was happening. Nader Shah then orders the executioner to torture and kill the four men immediately. One of the four men was a clergyman who told Nader that blinding Reza Gholi was perhaps the will of God. And Nader replied that today I am will of God, and that I will torture and kill you the way that not even God could imagine. After blinding his son, Nader Shah seemed to become more and more ruthless and was forgetting the promises he had made to the people by being free from paying taxes for the next 4 years. Instead, he hid all the treasures from India in a very remote castle in Kalat, a city at the north of Khorasan, and appointed high-ranking governors to collect taxes from different provinces of Persia. As you can imagine, the Persian people were very poor after so many wars and revolts that had to be crushed by Nader Shah. On top of all that, the high-ranking governors were abusing their power to collect taxes as well as bribes and money from the people for themselves. Nader Shah was, of course, unaware of the corruption, and nobody seemed to be brave enough to inform him. To bring peace and control a country as vast of Persia was not very easy, and one had to be very powerful, well-informed, and disciplined. Unfortunately, people were very unhappy. Nobody had the courage to inform or advise Nader Shah, and unrest was spreading all over. Sistan was one of the provinces that was not able to pay the taxes. Nader Shah decides to send Ali Quli Khan, his nephew, to Sistan to collect the unpaid taxes. Ali Quli Khan arrives in Sistan and saw with his own eyes that the people lived in extreme poverty and could not pay taxes. Ali Quli Khan was also a very power-craving man and greedy. He decides to kill Nader Shah, all his sons and grandsons. Nader Shah's sons and grandsons. Nader Shah was around 60 years old, had ruled the Persian territory for 11 years. He was now a very tired man, having spent his entire life riding on the horse from east to west and north to south of the Persian territory with his army several times. I said 11 years because for 11 years he was the king of Persia, but before that he was also acting as chief commander for the Safavid dynasty for Shah Tahmasp. He was about to leave Mashhad for Kalat. Nader Shah was about to leave Mashhad for Kalat with his family when the news arrived that the Uchan tribe is revolting and he should decide to crush the revolt and make people understand that he is still as powerful as in the past. He was very hesitant and did not have a good feeling about this. For the first time in his life, he was changing his mind, and his soldiers were also very surprised. The previous night, he had ordered the soldiers to be prepared to ride towards Kalat, and the next morning, they were riding to the opposite direction towards Uchan. Ali Quli Khan, who was in Sistan province, had meanwhile been in touch with 4 of his followers inside the Nader Shah troop, 4 traitors inside Nader Shah's troops. and was being informed about Nader Shah's plan to crush the rebellion, to crush the rebellion in Quchan. Ali Qoli Khan and his four devoted followers, four spies, four traitors, knew that they would either be killed after the Quchan battle or must kill Nader Shah as soon as possible. Approaching Nader Shah was almost impossible since he was always surrounded by four bodyguards who were extremely careful that no one could ever get close to Nader Shah's tent. Ali Qoli Khan's plan was to have his four followers, the four traitors, burned the village of Quchan as Nader Shah's troops were crushing the uprising inside the village, and at night have Nader Shah's four bodyguards killed by Ali Qoli Khan's followers at exactly the same moment. It had to happen the same moment. The four soldiers surrounding or guarding the Nader Shah's tent had to be killed simultaneously at the same time. This had to be done very skillfully by slitting the throats of the bodyguards so that the bodyguards would not be able to make the slightest sound and would not awaken Nader Shah and his wife sleeping inside the tent. Ali Qoli Khan was also eager to be close to Quchan at the night of Nader Shah's murder. So he rode all the way from Sistan to Quchan to back his four followers, the four traitors, at the night of the murder, at the night of assassination. As previously mentioned, Nader Shah was admired and fully supported by his soldiers and officers. Most of these officers were brave men from different Persian provinces. Muhammad Qajar, the father of Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar from the Qajar tribe, Ahmad Khan Ebdali, the head of the Afghan regiment, officers from the Zan tribe, Georgian and Turkmen officers. They were all at Quchan at the night of the assassination. The traitors' plan were executed at exactly after midnight when both Nader Shah and his wife were sleeping. His brave wife Setare used to have her dagger close to her bed, and Nader Shah his famous iron wand next to his pillow. The traitors managed to kill the bodyguards and enter Nader Shah's tent. That was almost pitch dark except the candle light above Nader Shah's bed. Nader Shah and Setare woke up very shocked to see the four traitors and could not figure out whether they were friendly soldiers bringing important news at that time of night, and by the time the four traitors were attacking, it was already too late. In a matter of seconds, the four traitors had finished their job by separating Nader Shah's head from his body. The only resistance from Nader Shah at that instance was to throw his iron wand in the dark, since he could not see the attackers. Setare, on the other hand, his wife, managed to stab one of the attackers with her dagger, but she was also strangled immediately. The next morning, there was chaos in Nader Shah's camp. Ali Quli Khan declared himself the new king of Persia and had Nader Shah's head exposed at the end of a spear in the middle of the square, where everyone could see that Nader Shah is no longer their king. Nader Shah's soldiers and officers were all very disgusted with Ali Quli Khan, and the majority of them decided to leave the army rather than serve and fight for Ali Quli Khan. Ali Quli Khan was Nader Shah's nephew and had been treated with extreme kindness. He, like Nader Shah, was also from an unknown village from the Afshari tribe. Before Nader Shah, Ali Quli Khan and his family were weak and poor. Nader Shah had made Ali Quli Khan a rich, powerful man, and it is horrible to see that your own family, your own blood, is your own enemy. Ali Quli Khan and the four traitors then headed towards the Kalat fort, north of Mashhad, where the treasures of Nader Shah was being kept. Ali Quli Khan and the four traitors then headed towards the Kalat fort, carrying Nader Shah's head with them. As they arrived at Kalat fort, Nader Shah's trusted officer refused to let Ali Quli Khan enter the fort. He explained that he had Nader Shah's strict order and could not allow anyone enter the fort. Ali Quli Khan then took Nader Shah's head out of the bag and asked the fort keeper whether he recognizes the head. He then explained that as of that day, the king of Persia is no longer alive, and that Ali Quli Khan is his new king, and he commands him to open the fort doors. The fort keeper, who was very frightened for himself and his family's life, had to obey. Ali Quli Khan and the four traitors entered the fort to see the treasures. The treasures were well hidden inside a huge safe in a cave, and no one had access to the safe except Nader Shah, who was now dead. After some discussions and despite all the dangers, they decided to blow up the safe's door with dynamites. The safe was finally opened, and Ali Quli and the four traitors were astounded to see so much treasure in one place. Ali Quli split the treasure with the four traitors, and they needed hundreds of horses and camels to displace the treasure. Ali Quli Khan then went back to Mashhad to deal with his uncle's sons and grandsons. They were arrested, tortured, and killed, except Shah, who was a childhood friend of Ali Quli Khan's daughter. Shah was the grandson of Nader Shah. Some of Nader Shah's grandsons were as young as few months old, and some were still unborn. Ali Quli Khan showed no mercy and suffocated them with his own hands. As for Shah Rukh, he was imprisoned and was asked to marry Ali Quli Khan's daughter. For Shah Rukh, a young man, was a very hard decision, since all his brothers, father, uncles, and nephews were just murdered by Ali Quli Khan, who is now about to be his father-in-law. Ali Quli's daughter was very fond of Shah Rukh, who was also a very handsome and kind young man. The first few days in prison, Shah Rukh had refused to marry Ali Quli Khan's daughter, but after being blinded and tortured, he had no choice but to accept this marriage. Meanwhile, the country was falling apart, and Muhammad Qajar in the north and the Zand tribe in the south, they were loyal to Shah Rukh, grandson of Nader Shah, now blinded, decided to restore the throne to Shah Rukh. They joined forces to defeat Ali Quli Khan and bring stability back to Persia. They managed to succeed defeating Ali Quli Khan with very little effort, and they captured Ali Quli Khan. Ali Quli Khan was taken to Shah Rukh so that he would decide the fate of the person who had killed his family and blinded him. Shah Rukh decided to forgive Ali Quli Khan and let the mothers of her brothers and nephews to deal with Ali Quli Khan the way they wanted. As soon as Ali Quli Khan was taken to the yard, these women who had lost their sons and brothers could not hesitate, and Ali Quli Khan was dismembered and killed immediately. Now, this was the true story of Nader Shah, a man who spent his entire life along with his soldiers and officers fighting wars at the time when Persia was becoming disintegrated and in total mess. So now to the northeast of Iran, Persia, Shah Rukh was still the leader of Afshari dynasty, and in the other parts of Persia, in the north, the Qajari tribes, and in the south, the Zand tribe were forming their own dynasty. The next two dynasties who ruled Persia were the Zand dynasty, an Iranian dynasty founded by Karim Khan Zand that initially ruled southern and central Iran in the 18th century. It later quickly came to expand to include much of the rest of contemporary Iran, as well as Azerbaijan, Bahrain, and parts of Armenia and Iraq. And the Qajar dynasty was an Iranian royal dynasty of Turkic origin, as I said, in the north. specifically from the Qajar tribe, ruling over Iran from 1789 to 1925. The Qajar family took full control of Iran in 1794 after deposing Lutf Ali Khan, the last Shah of the Zand dynasty, and reasserted Iranian sovereignty over large parts of Caucasus. In 1796, Muhammad Khan Qajar seized Mashhad with ease. Mashhad was where Shah Rukh was head of the Afshar dynasty. Putting an end to Afshar dynasty, and Muhammad Khan was formally crowned as Shah after his punitive campaign against Iran's Georgian subjects. In the Caucasus, the Qajar dynasty permanently lost many of Iran's integral areas to the Russians over the course of the 19th century, comprising modern-day Georgia, Dagestan, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. The Zand era was an era of relative peace and economic growth for the country. Many territories that were once captured by the Ottomans in the late Safavid era were retaken, and Iran was once again a coherent and prosperous country. After Iranian painting reached its height at the end of the 17th century, a special school of painting took shape during the Zand era in the 17th and 18th centuries. The art of this era is remarkable, and despite the short length of the dynasty, a distinct Zand art had time to emerge. Many Qajar artistic traits were copied from the Zand examples. In foreign policy, Karim Khan attempted to revive the Safavid era trade by allowing the British to establish a trading post in the port of Bushehr. This opened the hands of the British East India Company in Iran and increased their influence in the country. The taxation system was reorganized in a way that taxes were levied fairly. The judicial system was fair and generally humane. Capital punishment was rarely implemented. John R. Perry writes of Karim Khan Zand as a forward-thinking and popular leader whom he credits as opening up international trade, employing a fair fiscal system, and showing respect for coexisting religious institutions. And I told you before that in the north, the Qajar was trying to capture the south, and the Zand dynasty was trying to stop them. And Karim Khan Zand managed to capture Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar, and Agha Muhammad Khan was treated kindly and honorably by Karim Khan, who made him convince his king's men to lay down their arms, which they did. Karim Khan then settled them in Damghan. In 1763, Agha Muhammad Khan and Hussein Qoli Khan were sent to the Zand capital, Shiraz, where their paternal aunt Khadija Begum, who was part of Karim Khan's harem, lived. Agha Muhammad Khan's half-brothers Murtaza Qoli Khan and Mustafa Qoli Khan were granted permission to live in Asra Abad, north of Persia, due to their mother being the sister of the governor of the city of Asrabad. His remaining brothers were sent to Qazvin. They were treated honorably. Agha Muhammad Khan was looked upon more as a respected guest in Karim Khan's court than captive. Furthermore, Karim Khan also acknowledged Agha Muhammad Khan's political knowledge and asked his advice on interests of the state. The next book I have been reading is called The Adventurous Life of the Gallant Zand by Nusrat Nazmi, and is the story of Lutf Ali Khan Zand. Lutf Ali Khan Zand came to power after a decade of infighting among a succession of violent and inept Zand chiefs following the death in 1779 of the dynasty's founder Karim Khan Zand. Their failure to agree on a successor and to govern with the same benevolence as Karim Khan eroded public faith in the Zands. An increasing number of local and regional leaders began aligning themselves with the eunuch Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar, who sought to defeat and succeed the Zands. The son of Jafar Khan, Lutf Ali Khan claimed the throne in 1789 upon the death of his father Jafar Khan. Had been poisoned by a slave bribed by a rival family member, Sayyid Murad Khan Zand. Hearing of his father's murder, Lutf Ali Khan marched to the Zand capital of Shiraz. Sayyid Murad Khan was forced to surrender and was executed. Soon after assuming his title, Lutf Ali Khan's principal rival, Agha Muhammad Khan of Qajar dynasty, marched south to Shiraz. Their two armies met outside the city in a battle in which Agha Muhammad Khan prevailed, using camels to scare the Zand horses on the battlefield. Despite this defeat, the Zand leader was able to hold Shiraz until the Qajar did. Hearing of his father's murder, Lutf Ali Khan marched to the Zand capital of Shiraz. Sayyid Murad Khan was forced to surrender and was executed. Soon after assuming his title, Lutf Ali Khan's principal rival, Agha Muhammad Khan of the Qajar dynasty, marched south to Shiraz. Their two armies met outside of the city in a battle in which Agha Muhammad Khan prevailed, using camels to scare the Zand horses on the battlefield. Despite his defeat, the Zand leader was able to hold Shiraz until the Qajar forces withdrew to Tehran. The following year, 1790, Lutf Ali Khan led his forces against the governor of Kerman, who had refused to appear in person to acknowledge the Zand leader. This campaign failed due to harsh winter conditions, which led to the loss of a large number of men. In 1791, Lutf Ali Khan marched to re-establish his control over Isfahan. He had grown increasingly suspicious of the loyalties of Haj Ibrahim, the Kalantar of Shiraz, the Sheriff of Shiraz. As a result, he took the Kalantar's son with him. Once the Zand army had left the city, Haji Ibrahim had the remaining Zand officers arrested and sent word to his brother, a member of Lutf Ali's army, that the city was now under his control. A mutiny ensued, and Lutf Ali and several hundred loyal soldiers fled back to Shiraz, where they found the gates barred against them. Fearing reprisals against their families locked within the gates, most of Lutf Ali's men deserted him. With only a handful of followers remaining, the Zand ruler then fled to Bushehr. Here too, he encountered a hostile local leader. With the help of a sympathetic governor in the port city of Bandarig, Lutf Ali Khan managed to raise a small army made of sympathetic locals. With their help, Lutf Ali defeated and attacked from Bushehr and Kazarum. The governor of Kazarum was captured and blinded. An impulsive act by Lutf Ali Khan that weakened the sympathy which his youth, his courage, and his misfortunes were so calculated to incite. Emboldened, Lutf Ali Khan returned to Shiraz, which Haj Ibrahim had offered to Agha Muhammad Khan. There he defeated an army led by Mustafa Quli Khan Qajar. Lutf Ali Khan's smaller force then succeeded in repelling the attack of a second Qajar force. At this point, Agha Muhammad Khan himself led the 30 to 40,000 men against a much smaller Zand army. In a pivotal battle near Persepolis, whose outcome would determine the leadership of the nation, Lutf Ali Khan gained the upper hand over the much larger Qajar army, launching a nighttime raid on the main camp of the Agha Muhammad Khan. As the Qajar soldiers scattered, Lutf Ali assumed Agha Muhammad Khan had fled with them and that the camp was secured. He forbade his men from plundering the camp and withdrew to wait for sunrise. But Agha Muhammad Khan had remained hidden in the royal pavilion. At dawn, the call to prayer signaled that the Qajar army had regrouped. Lutf Ali Khan had no choice but to retreat. An alternative version of this story suggests that Lutf Ali Khan was tricked into waiting until daybreak to enter the enemy camp on advice of a Qajar spy named Mirza Fatali Ardelani. He and his followers first fled to Kerman in 1792, but with the Qajar in pursuit, they were forced to Tabas. With the aid of a sympathetic governor in Tabas, Lutfali attempted without success to retake Shiraz. At the time, the former Zand capital was firmly under the control of Agha Muhammad Khan. In July 1792, the Qajar Shah ordered the family and harem of Lutfali Khan and other Zand nobles and their families sent to his new capital, Tehran. Repelled in his effort to reclaim Shiraz, Lutfali Khan decided to travel east to Kandahar in modern-day Afghanistan to solicit the aid of Taimur Shah. But after a few days, he learned of Taimur Shah's death. Feeling indecisive and depressed, Lutfali Khan turned back. His spirits were restored by pledges of support from tribal leaders from Bam and Namashir. Bolstered by an additional 1,000 horsemen, Lutfali Khan took Kerman in 1794. He held the city for 4 months against Agha Muhammad Khan and a large army. During this time, gold coins were struck in Kerman in tribute to the Zand leader. One of those coins found its way to Agha Muhammad Khan, who was so enraged that he sent orders that Fatullah Khan, the son of Lutfali Khan, who had been taken to Tehran with other Zand nobilities, was to be castrated. As the siege of Kerman wore on, some troops became disaffected and ultimately opened the citadel gates to the Qajar army. After a 3-hour battle, Lutfali fled by night to Bam. Agha Muhammad Khan exacted a brutal revenge on the people of Kerman for harboring his enemy. All the male inhabitants were killed or blinded, and a pile was made of 20,000 detached eyeballs and poured in front of the victorious Qajar leader. The women and children were sold into slavery, and the city was destroyed over 90 days. Finally, Lutfali Khan was betrayed by the ruler of Bam, who feared that his brother had fallen into Qajar hands in Kerman. Lutfali Khan was captured soon after. According to legend, Lutfali Khan fought 40 men single-handedly for 2 full hours before falling. The last of the Zand rulers was finally delivered to Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar, who had long waited to exact revenge on his arch-rival. The page of history would be stained by a recital of the indignities offered by the royal captive. It is reported that Lutfali Khan was blinded. Lutfali Khan was imprisoned and tortured in Tehran before being choked to death in the late of 1794. The British writer Sir Harford Jones Bridge knew Lutfali, whom he called the last chivalrous figure among the kings of Persia. Bridges writes sadly of Lutfali's death. of his little son who was castrated. His daughters were forced to marry the scum of the earth, and his wife who was dishonored. Accounts of Lutf Ali Khan's personality and behavior depict a person of courage and perseverance, who inspired greatly loyalty among his followers. Had he been able to defeat Agha Muhammad Khan, he might have restored his family's dynasty and its good name. But a fatal mistake in a pivotal battle effectively ended Lutf Ali Khan's ambitions. With his defeat, the 44-year reign of the Zands came to an end, and the first chapter in the 131-year Qajar dynasty was written. This is the Zandian map of the area that they had in their control. The tomb of Lutf Ali Khan is in Imamzadeh Zayd in the Old Bazaar of Tehran. His portrait is in the Museum of Fine Arts in Saadabad Palace. It is said that Lutf Ali Khan was uniquely handsome and tremendously skillful with the sword. Today, one of the main avenues in Shiraz bears Lutf Ali Khan Zand's name. In Shiraz and other cities, streets bear the name of the Zand patriarch Karim Khan. They are the only former rulers of Persia whose names have been preserved in this way in the post-revolutionary period. This is largely due to the fact that Karim Khan Zand never claimed the title of king or shah, but chose simply to declare himself the advocate or regent of the people. The last book, Muhammad Khan Qajar, by Dr. Nasser Enqita, was also very fascinating. He was the son of Muhammad Qajar, the loyal officer of Shah Afshar, the grandson of Nader Shah. Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar, also known by his other name Agha Muhammad Khan, Agha Muhammad Shah, was the founder of the Qajar dynasty of Iran, ruling from 1789 to 1797 as king. Originally chieftain of the Qoylu branch of the Qajar tribe, Agha Muhammad Khan was enthroned as the king of Iran in 1789, but was not officially crowned until March 1796. Having deposed of Lutf Ali Khan of the Zand dynasty in 1794, Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar was famously the eunuch monarch, being castrated as a young adult upon his capture by Reza Qoli, the nephew of Nader Shah, Afshar. The nephew of Nader Shah, who had killed Nader Shah and hence was childless. He was assassinated on 17th June 1797 and was succeeded by his nephew Fatali Shah Qajar. Agha Muhammad Khan's reign is noted for the return of a centralized and unified Iran and for relocating the capital to Tehran, where it still stands today. He is also noted for his cruel and rapacious behavior, particularly during the resubjugation of Georgia. he sacked the capital Tbilisi, massacred many of its inhabitants, and moved some 15,000 Georgian captives back to the mainland Iran. Now let us see what is happening in Europe at around the same time. Europe Renaissance period was developing between 14th and 17th century. And the French Revolution in 1789, and Napoleon was about to conquer Europe, the Industrial Revolution at the end of Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar's rule in medieval Persia. So at the end of Agha Muhammad Khan Qajar's rule, there were major changes in Europe, major developments. There was Industrial Revolution, there was Renaissance, and all these scientists, they were coming up with ideas. Copernicus, Galilei, Newton, actually I must say that most of their ideas, these scientists had originated from the medieval Persia, probably from Omar Khayyam, Khwarazmi, and Avicenna. So I'll finish now. Bye.